Welcome to another video in which I want to bring up the topic about tanking anxiety again, as I know there are many players, especially those that have recently hopped over from WoW or other games to test out Final Fantasy XIV, that kinda feel anxious about tanking. And as there are some misconceptions about this topic, I want to tell you that there's no reason to not play a tank, even as your first job or class to start this game with. Yes, the tank is and will be the defining factor of the pace of your dungeon clear, or the one that is required to know certain boss mechanics to adjust its positioning or handle tank buster mechanics. But let me make this clear, even in Savage or Ultimate content, each individual player has to take care of these positionals, and in content below that difficulty threshold, your positioning doesn't matter at all, as long as you're not spinning the boss or ignore the fact that there are 2 targets and 3 tanks, which should ring the bell for you that splitting targets could be necessary. But let us start a bit earlier. When starting into Eorzea, you may believe that choosing a DPS job could get you through the main scenario quests and everything around it much easier and faster, but believe it or not, I would easily bet that a tank can clear everything from creating your character towards the completion of the final quest in Shadowbringers a tad more quickly, simply from the fact that your queue will pop up instantly most of the times, where DPS jobs may have to wait much longer. And the damage you may find missing compared to a strong Dragoon or Samurai is not worth mentioning. Far from it, I still believe that my Dark Knight clears some trash enemies faster than any melee job would, because of the lack of rotational build-up and positionals that are always keeping your burst and damage output behind in time, in contrast to the bursty and fast-paced combos and OGCDs of a Dark Knight, for example. Above that, you can easily handle multiple foes without worrying about your well-being, and in AoE scenarios, tanks and DPS jobs are even closer in damage output than on single target scenarios, and even there, a DPS difference between a top performing DPS job in Savage raids and group optimized encounters may be 50 to 60% more damage, but you will never run into any of these encounters when leveling or progressing through your main scenario quest, especially due to the syncing issues or the natural idea behind syncing down to a level, which will always lead to an imbalance that can easily favor the jobs like a strong white mage or tank to push out the same damage as a damage dealer would. So what I want to say here is that if you're starting as a tank, you may actually be faster than on a DPS job. Next up, we have to talk about the idea of setting the pace for your group. I cannot deny the fact that knowing the dungeon or raid fight comes in handy with optimizing your run and positioning, as well as having the fitting knowledge to pull the enemies that your healer and party can handle. But believe it or not, dungeons will never be more difficult than during the leveling phase. Those on endgame level are so easy that you can literally survive with all the power and abilities you have for yourself. Above that, setting the pace and adjusting it with each repetition of the dungeon will teach you how to use your defenses properly in the best possible way, as it is the only fraction of content where you're getting constant hits and possible fatal damage all the time. Savage and Ultimate encounters are much more forcing you and your party to hit one specific defensive or utility button at the exact timing, instead of managing your resources to survive the powerful assault of your enemies. Surely you can also just start pulling some enemies pack per pack, but believe me, going further and catching in whatever you can, which refers to the so-called wall-to-wall pull, will teach yourself and your healer some good lessons and how to optimize your resources and maximize their job's value. I know, there are people around with this mentality of you don't pay my sub and I can play however I want, but I honestly believe that even the comfy evening chill player has a better enjoyment if there's actually something to do in a dungeon and to make it more thrilling and exciting, which is definitely not the case when just pulling them pack after pack. So even if you may not be familiar with a dungeon, never hesitate to test out your limits, because it will provide a much better learning curve than easily beating packs without even thinking about your defensive tools, as these are the defining aspect dividing the tank expert from the beginner. But of course, if your healer cannot keep up with the pace, assessing a slower speed and lesser enemies at once is also another way of expertise that a good tank's repertoire should offer. Which also means that you can make use of politely asking the healer if he wants to try more than a single pack. That can directly motivate your healer, or at least give him the info that it is possible to do more. And yes, there's no single dungeon where a good party cannot handle wall-to-wall pulls. And before hopping to raiding and 8 to 24 man boss fights, let me spend some words on enmity, which is the Final Fantasy XIV term for aggro, or with other words, the value that the boss is more eager to smash your face. Since Shadowbringers, the whole section of enmity has been boiled down significantly, and this evolved simply into the question, is my tank stance on or is it off? Which means as long as you're having your tank stance toggled on, each action will cause a significant amount of enmity on the target. Showing them you're stinky is easily enough to keep your attention for the pull, but each small hit of an attack will guarantee to not lose them for healing on time effects, for example, or the usual rotation preparation of your DPS job. Of course, when a DPS in your group is going for the kill and smashing in a whole single target rotation into one foe, when you're still pulling packs together, it may not be an issue, or at least not your issue, but even here you can easily just provoke and get back the attention. And when looking at single target situations, whoever is going to take responsibility should use their tanking stance, and the other tanks should turn it off to avoid aggro ping pong that will make the life of melee jobs turn into a disaster. On the other hand, if there are multiple tanks around and one is dying, make sure to provoke instantly and get your tanking stance up. I don't know how often I had tanked a boss as a damage dealer when at least 2 tanks were still alive, and the remedy is so easy. So whatever you're doing, please not let the boss be untanked. And this of course directly brings us to the topic, where should I put this beefy boss with this beefy hitbox? My general tip to newcomers is to actually not move it anywhere if you don't know where to put it. From here you can easily correct things and start on a good balanced scale where nobody is thinking, hey, that tank, what are they doing? And if you need to put it into a certain spot, people might directly see that you're new to it. But whatever you're doing and which position you may have found, don't rotate it over and over and over again. Your local monk player will love you if you're solid iron on the set position, and in the best case have turned the boss so that even its mechanics are not changing the position. But above all this, just make sure to tell your party that you're new to the boss, and if you know other tank is taking up responsibility, you can try and let other members help you. When it comes to boss explanations or stuff alike, people in 14 are super friendly and helpful. Just don't queue up for a savage farming party if you don't have a single clue about the task you have to accomplish with the job you're joining with. In the second alternative, when another tank is taking responsibility, make sure to focus on their positioning and learn from it, if it seems correct of course. Okay, last but not least, tanking and spanking. The natural design of Final Fantasy XIV demands all players to deal damage, especially for healers and tanks. This fact can become very unclear at the beginning. But even the single target damage you're able to cause as a tank can have quite some impact on the overall completion time and to get your party through before enrages happen. So never forget to just hit damn buttons, my friends. And as a rule of thumb for defensives, keep them on cooldown and use the big mitigations for big attacks, but not all together unless you know that there is no other tag around. But as this topic is much more packed into each tanking job individually, check out the job guides about them on my channel, or check out my tanking beginners guide, which is framed at tanking newcomers to get started. So all in all, instead of fearing to take up responsibility, take it up to show others how things work properly. And please understand that nobody is able to become a tanking expert without making important mistakes on their own. Which means with each failure comes wisdom and a better knowledge how to optimize your defensives, your pulls and your positioning, and the best way to learn it is to get started. Hop in there, start one of the many awesome tanking jobs and lead your group into all sorts of content, and do not hesitate to ask for help when it's needed. Thanks a lot for watching, and if you're still a bit anxious, check out the videos in the description. Until next time, stay safe, stay healthy and keep loving Final Fantasy.